Hi, welcome to Shakey's podcast. Thanks as ever for joining. Please continue to like, subscribe, and follow the content. Really appreciate all the support. Another great podcast lined up for you today. Two great guests I have on with me, both from the Revolutionary Communist Party, which I'm hoping to learn a lot more about today. So I say hello to Fiona Lali and Sara Aldisi. How are you both?
Hello, I'm good, thanks.
Hi, yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you to you both for joining me, much appreciated. What I want to start by doing is I want to give you each the floor to kind of introduce yourselves, your backgrounds, just a bit of a summary of who you are, what you're involved in. So Sara, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I'm Sara. I am a student at the University of Edinburgh currently. I'm also a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party, obviously. And I'm from Palestine originally, although I grew up in Qatar. But yeah, I moved here to study and I found the RCP, and yeah, that's what I've been doing, studying and doing political work.
Thank you for that. And Fiona?
Yep, so I'm currently the campaigns coordinator for the Revolutionary Communist Party. And so over the last year, that has involved a lot of, coordinating students who are involved in university encampments for Palestine and so on and so forth. But I also came towards the RCP revolutionary politics when I was at university. My background is, my mother is Irish, my dad is Ugandan. They have their own political histories, those two countries, which definitely probably had an impact on how I viewed the world. But then, yeah, when I got to university, met Marxists, met communists, met revolutionaries who were trying to organize and signed up, and I've never looked back since. So yeah, that's kind of where
we have a quite similar background, a little bit different. So my mother is Scottish and my dad is Pakistani. So yes, I can relate to you in that way. Lots of different political views and backgrounds. But thank you very much for giving your introduction. So, look, I think it's safe to say we're going to talk about some current goings on in the world, something that both of you have been heavily involved in. I've followed your work. In particular, I came across you, Fiona, in a certain interview with a Suella Braverman, which was a bit of a humbling experience for her, and I thought you handled yourself with much grace on that recording. And I've kind of followed what you've done since, and I think you're doing some amazing things. So I want to start by asking Fiona, how and when did you start protesting for Palestine?
I would say I became the most politicized at university. And I think when you join any kind of Marxist organization or any kind of left-wing politics, you're going to talk about the main issues of the day. And imperialism is a massive part of that. And so I was always a part of attending meetings, discussions around Palestine. I remember also when I was at uni, I ran for like an NUS president and a big, not NUS president, just to be a delegate to the NUS. I've just exaggerated my role there. And a big part of the platform I tried to run on was this idea of internationalism, which is a big kind of tenet to Marxism as well. And I ended up inadvertently in that campaign talking about Palestine and different issues. But I mean, to be totally honest, obviously the last year has seen the biggest escalation of that entirely. I would say I've always attended the demonstrations and so on and so forth. But I think, like so many other people, what's happened in the last year has just brought it to the forefront of our organizing and a lot of my attention as well. And so, yeah, but I think really becoming a communist, I would argue, means that you're becoming an advocate for all of the oppressed all over the world. And right now, that light couldn't be shone more upon the Palestinians. So it's that journey that brings you towards Palestinian advocation or struggle, I would say.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Fiona. It's not just been the last 12 months. Prior to October 7th is obviously used as where it started, but I think we all know this has been going on all of my lifetime and both of your lifetime as well. So yeah, I can imagine it's been an ongoing ongoing kind of battle and raising your voice and raising awareness. Sarah, you're obviously Palestinian roots, so I'd imagine from kind of childhood, even though you grew up in Qatar, you must have been, you know, learning more about what's going on and also raising awareness.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, it's like an identity thing. As I grew up, I was like, I'm Palestinian, and I knew something was happening there. But I think I was really radicalized with the Second Intifada, seeing children my age at the time being killed on TV. And I actually remember, like, my first memory of anything related to that was like me and two other neighborhood kids just went and like had like a little protest on the street, like, and it was like, you know, people were support, like, it wasn't like we're not protesting and we didn't understand what a protest was. We were like, we just have all of these emotions and we wanted to, like, you know, express them about Palestine. But obviously, you know, that's how it started. And like, as I grew up, I realized that this is a bigger fight, right? Like, you know, obviously it's a personal thing for me, Palestine, but also it's an anti-imperialist struggle. And then that kind of, that was the way that I kind of got into communism, actually, of realizing, as Fiona was saying, that it's, you know, it's the oppressed people everywhere. This is suffering from capitalism, from the symptoms of it, like an imperialism. And so, and I think today we see that as well, like how many young people are being radicalized by what's happening in Palestine. Children, teens, young workers, and we see that, you know, obviously with the millions of people coming out in protest. So yeah, obviously it's an ongoing process for me. It's always been the case that I was protesting for Palestine, but yeah, I think communism made it more, for me, made it more impactful. Like it's about Palestine, but it's also about a lot more than that.
I agree. There's so much. There's so many other issues going on around the world as well. And you both have highlighted that, you know, you're there to raise your voice for all of these issues. And I commend you for that. Something I wanted to touch on. Sarah, I'll start with you and then on this one, because it was actually your video that I came across on Instagram on the page for the Edinburgh Revolutionary Communist page, and you were speaking about how you had an event lined up linked to Edinburgh Uni, and I'll let you tell what happened and the kind of things that you're facing when you're trying to protest for Palestine.
Yeah, so yeah, the most recent thing was this event that we were holding on October the 7th, called Resisting Imperialism from Gaza to Britain. And as the event says, we wanted to talk about what's happening in Palestine, connected to what we can do here in Britain, how we can resist imperialism. And yeah, that was cancelled by the university. The booking was cancelled. You know, they gave some excuse about some policy or whatever, but really, and the excuse they gave was also not true. So it shows you that really that was not the reason they cancelled the event. It is a political attack, right? And it's an attack against our freedom of speech at the university about Palestine. And specifically as well on October the 7th, because we have held events before about imperialism, but it's because we were trying to connect it to October the 7th and, you know, reveal the hypocrisy basically of not just the university, but, you know, the whole political establishment. That they cancelled it, and actually maybe we're a bit thankful for that, because we fought back and we said we're still going to hold the event whether the university wants to host it or not, and actually we drew a lot of people to us and to hear more about what the university did and what the government is doing as well. So yeah, I think it's. Yeah, the university's done that, but it's not, obviously, the university is just following the policy of what we're seeing, like what the politicians are doing, what the government is doing. And they have been arresting pro-Palestine activists in the whole last year, including one of our comrades actually in London at some point. So yeah, like, actually, like, I think in the last, when the Tories were in government, Rishi Sunak met with all of the vice chancellors, right, to talk about anti-Semitism. And October 7th, actually, this increased kind of harassment from the university came on the back of our own vice chancellor and the SNP secretly meeting with the deputy Israeli ambassador, right? And then since then, they've been kind of talking more about like, oh, you know, be careful about intimidating people, be careful about anti-Semitism. And it's like, yeah, it's complete hypocrisy, right? Because everyone on campus is in support of Palestine. No one is intimidated by pro-Palestine protests. They're actually intimidated by what they're seeing on TV, by these the vice chancellors and the politicians attacking pro-Palestine voices.
I haven't seen any violence at any pro-Palestine events. I've not seen, you know, it does seem like the intimidation is coming from the powers above now, rather than from, you know, anywhere else. It's certainly not coming from those protesting. Fiona, I think I mentioned to you when I introduced myself to you that, you know, I've recently been smeared as kind of anti-Semitic for kind of being very pro-Palestine and raising my voice in that space. It was my experience was with the BBC, how they didn't want me to speak about anything that was going on while I was covering the World Cup. What about you? You've been doing quite a lot of mainstream media. You know, your profile has risen a lot. What kind of backlash and challenges have you faced?
Yeah, well, I don't read any of my DMs. My DMs.
Good idea. Probably a good idea, Fiona.
They're not the nicest. But yeah, I mean, obviously the mainstream media, and then the kind of the more right-wing versions of them, like GB News, Talk TV. And I think what's interesting about, I would say, GB News and Talk TV is I think these media outlets, they just kind of say the quiet bit out loud. They say the most extreme versions of what actually BBC, Sky News, all of these corporations kind of think and would, you know, say if they could, but they have this certain air of respectability to themselves, but there isn't really a fundamental difference in their politics. But I have, you know, been on a tour. I've been going to different universities to speak about this campaign we're doing called Books Not Bombs, which is all about how, you know, the same people who are responsible for supporting these atrocities in Palestine also commit atrocities here through austerity and underfunding the NHS and underfunding education and so on and so forth. But obviously, because I'm quite an, you know, pro-Palestine, loudly kind of known, whatever, advocate, in different universities, I haven't actually been allowed, like the booking hasn't gone through, or I'm a controversial speaker. So we've had to do the meeting somewhere else. So I didn't get to, at Leeds, this happened at the University of Leeds. And then also I was at Manchester, the University of Manchester the other day. And they deregistered the society and then also changed the room booking. And it's just, what's incredible about this, and I say incredible from a kind of sarcastic point of view, is the levels of, like, universities for the last couple of years have been going on and on about free speech and how the left is trying to clamp down on free speech and so on. And then in an instant have completely transformed and gone out of their way to smear activists, to stop them from meeting. But I think what we should say is all of this comes from a position of weakness. I really believe that everything they do to try and clamp down on the Palestine movement reignites it in some form. All of the arrests, all of the smears, it just doesn't work in the same way perhaps that it used to. And it just gives people more of a fire to organize. So I think it comes from a weakness on their part. And actually the Palestine movement has probably never been stronger, despite the fact that they've thrown so much at it and they're trying so hard to stop us. It feels like, you know, something quite fundamental has changed, and I think they're worried, and they should be. Like,
I agree. That takes us into the next part. Let's touch on, you know, our political leaders. You know, the Tory government lost their spot, and I was skeptical about Labour and if they would be much different. They've started off very similar to the way the Tories are behaving, and we continue to provide arms to Israel. Now, Fiona, I've seen you on social media. You're not mincing your words. You are challenging these people, in particular the likes of Keir Starmer, David Lammy. You know, they're all complicit in the fact that we continue to provide arms. how and when, or when are they going to find their moral compass, and when is this going to stop? Because other European countries now are getting quite vocal, the French, the Spanish. Why not the British?
Well, I think Britain, Britain historically played a massive role in the creation of Israel and propping up Zionism, providing the resources for it. And then obviously at a certain point, America has taken over in playing that role, but obviously historically played a massive role, and there was a big connection between Britain and Zionism. That has a certain legacy in terms of what are the main interests of the British ruling class, I would say. But I think today, ultimately, Starmer, Lamy, these people, even though they come from the Labour Party, when they, won leadership positions in the Labour Party and, successfully basically removed Jeremy Corbyn, they transformed the Labour Party into being a safe vehicle for the interests of the British establishment and big business, and essentially British capitalism, which involves imperialism, which involves supporting Israel. And that it doesn't really matter what their individual moral compass is, I think, because I can't think of them from a moral perspective, because it's illogical. And so the only logical way to understand it is these people represent a system, and they defend certain interests within that system. So what I would say is that I'm not trying to appeal to the morality of David Lammy or Keir Starmer or any of them, but what I think they will respond to is the mass movement of people, because once a mass movement begins, they feel threatened, and they can see how that sort of thing can spiral. On the basis of that kind of action, things can change. And I would say historically, that's how most reforms, most genuine material improvements in people's lives come about. It's not the abstract morality of the politicians above us. It's the collective power of people organizing in a certain way. It has its own particularities in different countries, that, slightly different ideas floating around. But in Britain, I think we can't appeal to them on a moral basis. I think we have to confront them through our collective power. That's the only thing that will make an impact.
I hope it would have made an impact by now, with the thousands and the millions taken to the streets and cities from London all the way down to Edinburgh to Glasgow, all over Europe. They need to start reading the room sooner rather than later. You touched on a name there, and I'm going to jump to Sarah again, because she's been quiet for a while now. Sorry, Sarah, I know you're still here. A name that I've always looked at, and I've always thought, this guy's hard done by, and he always seems to be pushed out of the way and made to seem the bad guy, but in my opinion he's not, is Jeremy Corbyn. And I wanted to ask you, Sarah, what's your thoughts on Jeremy Corbyn? And is Jeremy Corbyn the type of person? I mean, I personally would like to see somebody like Jeremy Corbyn running the country, but I just want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Corbyn is a genuine person, and he does want to change. And I think the policies that he, on the back of which became the Labour leader before, obviously galvanized a lot of young people, and a lot of people were behind it. But I think the shortcomings of Jeremy Corbyn is that he wasn't thinking outside the system. As Fiona was saying, the politicians, the people in Parliament, really, at the end of the day, represent a system and an establishment. And it doesn't matter who is the face of that. They're gonna do the bidding of big business, right? And as well, like US imperialism, for example, which where they take their orders from a lot of the time. So because Jeremy Corbyn was trying to work within this, I think, and he was trying to kind of piece by piece, bit by bit, reform the system, try to work with the right wing in the Labour Party, and unfortunately he was betrayed. And the people who supported all of these policies as well, they were all betrayed as well by that, I would say, weakness. And it's not a moral weakness. Again, as I said, I think Jeremy Corbyn is a genuine person, but it's the weakness of reformism, I would say. And I think a lot of people are realizing that. They're realizing that politicians don't represent us. And as you said, there's millions of people who came out on the street to say one thing we support Palestine, we want the violence to end in Palestine. And that's not happened a year on. And it shows you that these politicians don't represent us. And what we need really is a complete overturn of how the system is being run. And the only way to do that is, not by putting a nice person in leadership, I guess. It would be by the mass movement, by the collective power of people, pressuring that change, really.
I agree with you. I think that's probably Jeremy's only downfall, isn't it? He's a bit too nice for that for that kind of politics. But maybe he's learned from that experience and he understands it a little bit more. But I mean, I feel coming to you again, Fiona. I've lived my whole life. I've never been interested in politics. Just putting that out there. You know, it's probably been something more in the last 5-6 years I've started to get more interested in. But the only reason for that is because I can't connect with any of these politicians. I have nothing in common with them whatsoever. That needs to surely change in the future. But is it going to change? How does it change, Fiona?
Yeah, I think you're not the only person who feels that way. I think today there is an enormous vacuum in society. I think the idea of the center ground has completely collapsed. I think society is polarizing. And we would all say that nature abhors a vacuum, right? Eventually, different forces are going to try and fill it. And you have the likes of Nigel Farage and Reform, which in a certain sense are tapping in to just anger and disgust that is sitting in society amongst people. And people express it in different ways. And some of them are expressing it through racism and horrific levels of racism and xenophobia. Because they're being given no alternative. Keir Starmer isn't offering them an alternative. Keir Starmer ran an election with change, and who has felt any change in their lives? Actually, the budget announcement, I'm sure, will not be one of glowing improvements in people's lives. It will probably be more austerity, and that is producing anger. Obviously, ultimately, as the RCP, we are trying to connect with that anger, and we are trying to say, the only genuine alternative is one that goes the full way. Now is not the time for like small reforms here or there. There's a fundamental sickness in this system. And for us, we would say we identify that sickness as the profit motive, because we think that's what connects Palestine to Britain, is that I would say we live in a system that puts profit above all human life, above everything. That's why they're willing to kill tens of thousands of people to protect Israel's economic, imperialist, and slightly ideological interests, right? They put profit above human life in Britain as well. And what we're striving to do is build a force that can actually enter that vacuum in a certain sense and pose the positive socialist demands that we have as an alternative to the reactionary, shallow racism and division that actually comes from the likes of Nigel Farage. And I think this also explains why young people today are so political, because I get asked this a lot, right? Like, you know, what's driving young people into politics? Is it Palestine? And it is Palestine. But I think it's actually that the conditions of capitalism today that have worsened literally over the last 5 to 6 years, as you mentioned, are forcing people into struggle. I don't think that people are abstractly more moral now than they were 10 years ago. I think the events of the world are transforming consciousness and the way people are like relating to the world, and that happens at certain moments in history. But the existential question is, can someone connect with that and actually offer the alternative, which is what we're trying to do.
Which is what you're trying to do, which brings me to my next question. Sarah, tell me a little bit more of what you're, just like a definition of communism. And then we can kind of just for my listeners, because I'm going to put my hands up. I'm learning all the time in this space. I don't try to say that I have the knowledge of communism and other political forms. I'm learning, and hopefully, maybe you'll convert me over. I'm nowhere at the moment. tell me like a definition, please, of communism.
Yeah, that's a tough question.
I know I put you on the spot there. I'm sorry.
But we actually get asked that a lot because we are trying to reach people, right? And we are on stalls with the RCP paper, the communist, and people do approach us asking, what is communism? What do you mean? What's capitalism even? And the way I would answer it is always, now we live in a system where, yeah, it is driven by the profit motive, by a few people holding most of the wealth in society, basically, and controlling what they want to do with that wealth based on their needs, their profits, instead of the needs of society. And communism is a fight for a society where that's not the case, and it's actually the opposite, that most people, working everyday people, are the ones that hold all of that wealth and can control it. And certainly they are now. Working people are the people who produce all the value in society. But it is being expropriated basically and stolen from them by the CEOs, by the big business. So what communism is just flipping that system that we have now on its head and having, yeah, the working class people in control of what they produce, and also deciding how that production is being, you know, I guess they're deciding how production is benefiting, is doing to society, and would actually be based on the needs of society. So I guess that would be my short answer for communism.
I think that's very good. I think that's a very good answer. That was my rough understanding, but just good to hear it from you. And I guess my thoughts on that would be, you know, I would far rather have the working class people who are in touch with the issues that you and I and other people are facing on the ground, whereas our current politicians have no connection with that whatsoever. Brings me to my next question, just rolling on from there again to Fiona. This all sounds great. How could, you know, communism work in the UK? And what's the chances of it coming into play? Because you're up against a system that is so deep-rooted with many, many issues. And I just, at the moment, I can't see how you would fit in. I guess the power of the people would be what makes that decision, and if your campaign was to grow. But I hope you got that question, Fiona. It's a bit well-rounded question. I had a few different elements to it. Hopefully you can understand what I'm asking.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, look, our argument is that we have all of the resources we need today in society actually to house everyone and to clothe everyone and to give everyone healthcare. The resources, the money exists. You know, I ran as an independent candidate in the election, which was a crazy experience. And I ran in Stratford, which is where I live. And we would do these street rallies outside Stratford Station where I just shout the programme and a crowd would gather. And I would always say, you know, the money exists, we know, because we can see it. And I would turn around because Canary Wharf is like right behind. And I would say, we can see it in Canary Wharf. We can
Good
see
example.
their flats. Like the money is there. We know they're sitting on the money. Our argument is that a mass movement of people and you know, kind of in a democratic way, because that's the other thing, like what we're talking about here, I would say, is the truest expression of democracy. Democracy, like genuine democracy, would be masses of people being able to decide collectively, what should we put our money into? Is it giving billions more to Ukraine, or is it creating more hospitals, like rebuilding the NHS in a way that it's actually functionable, and so on and so forth? But yeah, that requires the mass movement of people. And how's that going to take place? I don't think it will take place because I'm stood at the side of the road with a megaphone shouting and hoping one by one more people will come about. I actually think that today capitalism is in such a crisis, it's going to move people themselves. What we're talking about here is basically the idea that Britain needs a revolution and we need a party that could then connect and put forward a program to say, and this is the alternative. Because revolutions happen. They don't happen every day, but they happen every now and then in history. But unfortunately, often when these revolutions take place, there isn't an alternative that's been posed. And so that you have this exertion of energy and this, we say a revolution is like the masses taking control of their lives, because most people, you live your life, you work, you go home, you don't actually have agency over how you live. But a revolution is this moment when en masse people are saying, no, this is what I stand for, this is what I want, in a certain sense. I think that the conditions of capitalism today mean that a revolution will take place. I don't think it'll be tomorrow. I can't give you a date, but I think that the conditions for it are being prepared. And it's off the back of that. If we grow our party, if we have a program that connects, we'll say, yeah, and we want to expropriate the biggest businesses and use that money and use that wealth to build what we need, because it's there. That's kind of how we see it taking place. But I also think it's not for me to dream up in my head in advance. The real living historical movement of people being involved will decide that as well. I just want to help build a vehicle for that. Yeah. So I would say.
Good answer. I think something that's evidently clear that's coming across from both of you, as we've chatted through this podcast, is you appreciate that you have to be, you need people like you who are capable to go out, speak, brave, challenge the powers above. But this is only going to come through the movement of the people. We've seen it with the protesting of Palestine. We continue to see it all of our streets up and down the United Kingdom and all over the world, actually. So with your campaign, it's all about movement of the people, and that will, pave its way for change or a revolution. How is that growing? Sarah, how do you feel since you've joined the party? Do you feel that what kind of pace is it going at as you continue to campaign?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's a good example, actually, of what Fiona's saying about how people are being driven to these conclusions, right? And the growth of the RCP, I think, is a good example of that. I joined, I think it'll become 4 years very soon, let's say 3 years ago. And since then, the RCP has doubled, or more than doubled in size. And we can even speak about a specific example of this Books Not Bombs campaign, which we have launched in Edinburgh with the start of the academic year. And Fiona was actually here to launch it basically with us. And since then in Edinburgh, we have gained, I think, 6 new members, just by connecting the issue of Palestine with the issues that we are seeing here at home, and also how we can fight. People want to know how they can fight. They go to the protests and they hear all the sad things that are happening, and they get angry, but then there's nothing posed as a way of solution, basically. And actually, I found that people like that we actually do give a solution, and we do have a program. We have like an idea of how we can achieve this. So I think, yes, young people especially are making these conclusions, and we need to organize them to be able to create that force, that vehicle, as Fiona explained, to drive the mass movement that will eventually happen because of the crisis that we're seeing in the system, into socialism. Yeah.
The youth, as we come to kind of the back end of the podcast, the youth is the future, and I have a lot of hope in the youth of the future. I feel like they have natural humanity in them. Gen Z, which I've learned a lot more about in the last couple of years. I'm trying to up my knowledge in these. They don't mess around. They seem to have really strong will, and I guess these must be the youth is very important for you, Fiona, that you connect with them, because they're the future of our country.
100%. And this thing about Gen Z is good because, something I've been thinking about a lot recently is this idea of the Gen Z revolution. I remember there was this huge movement in Bangladesh, a revolution actually over the summer, which was led by students. Students sparked that, and then it spread and workers got involved. But it began with students in universities protesting against this quota system. And in loads of other countries this year, we've seen young people take to the streets in Kenya, in Nigeria, and Indonesia, like just being forced to move. And I think it's because I think if you're a young person today, you've got no memories of capitalism being good. Like your entire conscious adult life is this system now seemingly collapsing in on itself. It's climate change, a global pandemic, war, like floods, just total devastation. And then politicians coming onto our screen saying, well, this is the best we've got to offer, whilst actually the rich are getting exponentially richer and seemingly, becoming more and more detached. And there's a fundamental contradiction there. So I think there's a whole generation of people who are looking at that and thinking, no, not all of them right now are necessarily communists, or not all of them right now, but there's something that is brewing. And I think we're going to see more and more examples of this Gen Z revolution expressing itself. I'll be very interested in the youth turnout in the US election, for example, and to see what happens. In the general election in Britain, actually, the turnout in general was a bit low. I don't know. I would imagine, I would predict in the US it would be similar, because people are just disgusted by both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, Trump. They're all the same.
They're all the same. They're all the same. I don't think there's a. I mean, I can understand why people are not coming out in heavy numbers. I mean, it's pretty much the same in the UK. To be honest, when the election came, I was like, I don't know who I want to vote for. I don't really connect or support with any of these political parties. So there's a space in politics, I think, for a Fiona Lali or a Sara Aldisi to come into that space and to represent and connect with the normal working class people, because I mean, I certainly think I connect a lot better with you two than I would do with a Keir Starmer or a Nigel Farage or somebody like that. Look, it's been really insightful to listen to both of you today. I think you've got, you're doing some great work. You've got a wealth of knowledge, and you sound like you've got a tough slog ahead of you. Are you both up for the challenge? Is my last question to you. Do you really believe that you can bring about change in the UK and worldwide?
Absolutely, 100%. There's nothing I have more confidence in. I would say I'm not a betting person, but if I was going to bet on anything, it would be the Revolution Communist Party, the perspectives to revolution worldwide, and the need to keep going, and a confidence in this generation of people coming up. The Gen Z revolution, it's coming.
Sara, do you share that confidence with Fiona?
Yes, absolutely. In the UK and all over the world as well. I think we've seen that already. Revolutions are happening, and our perspectives about the system, about young people, have been proven once and again. And yeah, I'm optimistic, and I'm happy to be. I'm proud to be in the RCP, which have given me this confidence and have given me the knowledge to understand all of this and to fight it as well.
Well, to finish with, we hope and we will continue to fight and raise awareness and hope that all those oppressed around the world become free from oppression. And we need people like both of you and many others as well to continue to fight the powers above, to drive change, because it's very much needed. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much
for having us. It's been fun.